Great. So I'm just going to work my way sort of left to right in terms of the tabs that you can see down the bottom here. So our first tab, as Clint's already mentioned, is the landing page, which is essentially just the model's introduction page. It summarizes the layout and the objectives of the shared equity financial model. And you can see here we've got tab 1, the affordable housing model, in orange here. Tab 2, the preliminary feasibility model in green here, and tab 3, the detailed feasibility inputs and detailed feasibility model as number 3 and in grey down here. So this page also works you through how the model operates in terms of the colour of the cells, with the green shaded cells being the input cells and the balance of the model being locked for version control. Down here further we have the project key details, so just a place to summarise the key details of your project, and also any notes or findings or conclusions from working through the model can be summarised in here. So I won't spend too much time on that page. As I say, it's just a quick intro. So we'll jump straight into the shared equity affordable housing model. So this page here, the purpose of it is to demonstrate whether a household is able to achieve full home ownership within 15 years. And that's important because if the household can afford to buy the total property out, then the provider can afford to repay the PHO loan to MHUD. The model also calculates how the affordability of the household at year 1 and whether they can enter into the scheme initially. And then it forecasts the household's equity and cash reserves to show what position it will be in to buy out the remaining share within those 15 years. So 2 quite key criteria that we've based the affordable housing model on is some typical bank criteria, being the debt servicing ratio or DSR percentage, where ideally we'd like to see that being less than 30%. So that's less than 30% of the gross household income being attributed to debt servicing rates and insurance. The other criteria is the loan to value ratio, which we'd ideally like to see being less than 70%. So that's the ratio of the loan amount to the value of the property, or the ratio of the loan amount to the value of the share of the property that the household is purchasing at year 1. So in terms of working through this page, the green cells are the input cells, and you essentially work through the base data here in terms of the applicant's name, the provider's name, location, household description, which I'll come back to, and also an estimate of the household's income before tax, and this is broken down to however many people are contributing to that household income. We've got an eligibility criteria check here to check against HUD's criteria for entering the PHO scheme, and the traffic light here indicates, green indicates yes, they've met the criteria, red indicates no, they haven't. Here is a summary of the purchase price and the share that will be split between the household or the provider, and the provider, bearing in mind that under shared equity, the provider share can be no more than 45%. Here is a summary of the household finances, so a summary of how much cash reserves they have got at year 1 to put towards a deposit. So we can see here that subtotal, they've got 45,000. This then flows into the mortgage calculator to the right here, which calculates the total lending the household will require to buy their 55% share at year 1. and it also provides some flexibility in terms of a test interest rate and a loan term, which we've just set at sort of typical bank levels at the moment. Table 5 here provides a affordability budget at year 1. So it summarises the gross income that we've inputted above and any other income that's available to the household, and then you can estimate the expenses that will be incurred on a weekly basis to provide an estimate of whether the household is in a surplus or deficit position each week. So you can see for this household, they're saving $88 a week, and that's a potential saving of $4,500 per annum. The benchmarking that Clint's already alluded to in terms of the IRD estimates of household expenditure comes in here. So up the top here, there's 2 drop-down boxes, one for selecting the most appropriate location of the development and 2 for selecting the most appropriate household makeup. So these 2 drop-downs, they drive the benchmark numbers that come through here, and you can use this traffic light system to see how what you're inputting aligns with sort of industry data, I suppose, as a bit of guidance. So that is the affordability at year 1, and I'll come back to the key outputs that are summarised above. Table 7 here is the full home ownership assessment. So this requires 3 inputs. One is an estimate of house price inflation, an estimate of CPI inflation, and market equivalent rent. So this table essentially forecasts what the house will be worth based on house price inflation 15 years into the future. It also forecasts based on inflation what the household's income will be, and it also accumulates what the household's deposit will be over that time for refinancing. The idea is that we've incorporated our debt servicing and loan to value ratio percentages down here as a traffic light system. And the idea is that when the household gets to a double green light, they'll be in a position to buy out the provider's share in the property. So you can see here at year 13, the household is likely to be in a position to buy the provider out. The amber coloured lights provide some flexibility, and depending on where the banking sector is at that point, there might be flexibility to buy in at an earlier time. So that's just summarised here, the earliest point in which full purchase is possible. We've said year 13 with those quite hard and fast rules. And this graph here just shows the change in purchase price, loan requirement, LVR, and debt servicing ratio over time. So all of that is summarised up here just for ease. I know it's a bit to work through, so we've brought the key information to the front here. So this summarises at year 1 what the debt servicing percentage is, what the loan to value ratio is, whether the household is able to save money entering into the scheme at year 1. It provides a comparison between market equivalent rent and debt servicing rates and insurance at that year 1. So you can see that the household is much better off entering into the scheme than it is paying market equivalent rent in this instance. And it also brings forward that year in which we think a full purchase may be possible. So I guess as a bit of a summary, we think this page could be used for two functions. The first is to test a common income level amongst a group of households to determine whether that group would be suitable for what is proposed, or to replicate this page by copying it and using this page to assess individual households on an individual basis. I'll come back to this page on how it can be used further, but for now I'll jump into the prelim feasibility model. So this is sort of the other side of the equation. We've talked about household affordability and paying back the PHO loan, but on the other side of the equation is development feasibility and whether the development firstly stacks up financially and whether it can proceed to completion. So what we've tried to achieve here is to keep this as simple as possible for a topic that is, development is quite complex on many different levels. So we've tried to keep this as a bit of a snapshot. The objective of it is to provide a high-level assessment and indication of whether the development is feasible and to demonstrate how providers will fund the development of the homes they're putting households into. So this page can be used by providers or prospective providers who are looking to undertake a development and are at an early concept stage. They might have completed little or no due diligence, and they just want a rough idea. Alternatively, if a provider is looking to purchase the homes off a developer, they can use this page to test a developer's price points and costs to ensure that the provider is purchasing value for money sort of thing, and that the developer isn't super profiting. So in terms of how this works, you work your way through the inputs here on the left. So selecting whether it's a provider-led or developer-led development, what the costs of the land might be, what the costs associated with acquiring the land might be. If the land's already owned, you can put an estimate of market value in there. How many dwellings will be sold, the gross floor area, average per dwelling, purchase price, the share that will be purchased by the households, build costs per square metre, development costs, financial contributions per lot, professional fees, contingency percentages. And so we appreciate that, some of this is, it might not be stuff that you know off the top of your head, and we fully appreciate that there might be some conversations that will need to be had with, your local builder or other experts in the development space, just to get a rough guide of what some of these costs might be. Down here, we've got an estimate of how long the development might take in terms of the planning and site development, the construction phase, and through to sell down. If a developer is looking to undertake the development, you can record what percentage profit they're expecting from it. So they might say, look, we'll do the development. We're looking at a 10% profit on this, and you can use this to test whether that is realistic. Project funding, so what share of the houses will the provider be seeking funding for? 45%, bearing in mind that that's the max, and then an estimate of any other sources of funding. So we've included in here any equity that's already in the land, as that will feed into the overall project feasibility. So the inputs then flow through into table 3 here, the feasibility budget. So this is a high-level budget, incorporating all of the inputs that I've just talked to, and calculating the costs associated with development and construction, less the revenues from the sale of the household share and the PHO loan. So you can see in this instance, total project costs are 7 mil. Once we've had the sale of the sale to the households and the PHO loan coming in there, we're actually in a surplus of about $46,000, which is a 1% profit. The key outputs from this page are firstly from a developer-led development, whether the provider will need any additional lending to purchase the dwellings from the developer. So in this instance, with the PHO loan covering 45% and the households purchasing 55%, you wouldn't expect that, that equates to 100%. So you wouldn't expect the provider to require any lending. If the provider was undertaking the development, we've provided an estimate of the total lending required throughout the project on a worst case scenario. So that's without the PHO loan funding and without the sale of the household share, anticipating that will come in at the end. So once both of those revenues come in, the finance at completion is 0. If we drop, say, the sale of the dwellings to 500,000, that takes away some of the profit. So the provider may need to lend, 360,000 at the end. So I guess at an early concept stage, this tab and the affordable housing model can be used in conjunction to sort of vary the house price to see what would stack up in terms of household affordability and also what would stack up in terms of project feasibility. So we can see in the affordability model, home ownership can be achieved at year 13 with a purchase price of 500,000. But we know from the prelim feasibility model that if we had a purchase price of 500,000, the provider's going to need lending at completion, which they may not have or may not have access to. So we can change things. We can, explore if the household could afford a $600,000 dwelling, and we can see that they can't. But it might be that there's actually another $10,000 coming in as income from another person in that household, and so then it might push them into the realm of affordability. So yeah, we, as a prelim sort of phase, we thought the two could be used together to sort of work out where that sweet spot is in terms of affordability and project feasibility. So moving on to the final tabs here, which I won't go into a huge amount of detail because they really need their own session, if I'm honest. There's quite a bit to them, but the detailed feasibility model, it should only really be used if a provider is looking to undertake the development themselves, and they've completed quite a significant level of due diligence and planning, and they know their development is feasible, and they know that their households can afford to enter the scheme. So it's essentially just a more detailed approach to the prelim feasibility model, and it's used to capture the flow of revenues and funding and construction costs and development costs to provide an indication of when the provider might be in deficit and might need lending to sort of top them up to allow them to complete the development and put their households into the homes. So the two tabs work sort of interdependently. So the inputs tab is the key inputs page, and this then flows through into the detailed PHO model, which summarizes those inputs and the timing and provides an estimate of when that deficit will occur. So this graph is quite a good, just quick overview, showing that the development timeline is 29 months. There's there's funding coming in early on. We've got a lot of costs and we dip into a deficit. We have some sales, we have some more funding, we have some more costs, but at the end of the project, we're potentially $1.5 million positive. So yeah, essentially a more in-depth analysis as the prelim feasibility doesn't capture timing. And our final page here is just a locked codes page, which has all of our IRD benchmarking data, which feeds back into the affordable housing model. So this is permanently locked and doesn't require any inputs. So that sort of takes us to the end, and I hope I haven't rattled through that too quickly. But yeah, I'll hand back over to Nigel now to finish things up.
Yeah, thank you, Hayley. I've probably got a bit of feedback here. I'll probably leave you in control in case there's questions, and then you can go back to the appropriate tab on the model. So I saw a question there from from Te Au Patel. Does this model cover off the situation where a provider shares its capital gains with whānau, i.e. the share of capital gains that accrue to whānau is larger than the share that whānau hold? So on the affordable housing model, household model, does the model have that flexibility to change the share of the final capital gain over and above the share that's set at the start of the model?
Yes, yeah. Just jump back into here. So with the shared equity model, no, we've set that at what the initial share. So whatever is indicated up here then splits the equity gain accordingly. But we have, with the rent to buy, we did incorporate that ability to split the equity gain depending on how the provider wants to allocate that. So shared equity, no. Rent to buy, yes.
Right. How have you treated tax in putting the models together? So probably, I think probably taken it as a sort of a, we haven't looked at individuals' own tax situations. These models have just been adopting sort of standard tax treatment on developments. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, I agree with you, Nigel. With tax, there's so many individual situations that it's hard to capture all. But from a development perspective, we've factored in, typical tax payments in terms of the rent to buy. We haven't factored in income tax. So yeah, we've got some assumptions around that, which is all detailed in the guidance document. But essentially, we tried to find a common ground that would serve us most.
Thanks, Hayley.